I don't like doing my own home repairs, and when I made some videos that honestly show how much I don't like it, they seem to help a lot of other guys like me. So I thought it would be good to make this new set of videos. Guys like me have a million questions for the progressive activists that we see on the news, but nobody on TV ever asks those questions. On CNN, the host probably agrees with the activists, so his questions are weak. And on Fox News, the host just tries to make them look bad. Either way, nobody's asking the questions that might actually help us get a feel for where they're coming from, so we might actually understand them a little better. It's no surprise that people who disagree over politics are so angry at each other nowadays. So right before Christmas, me and my brother, who is himself progressive, we drove around the West and did our own interviews. We drove to 22 cities and interviewed dozens of people who support progressive causes to ask those questions that are never asked. We're not trying to change their mind or make them look bad. We just want to understand where they're coming from. These folks were brave, considering what can happen nowadays if you say one wrong thing on YouTube. And we talked about a lot of really sensitive subjects. So just leave right now if these conversations might offend you. If you stay though, I think you'll hear some things you've never heard before and have a better understanding of your fellow Americans. I did. In Portland, we met Brian Lacy, the owner of Urban Bees and Gardens, a company that offers products and educational programs for beekeeping. If you're in the Portland, Vancouver media market, you may know Brian as the bee guy on the local news and in the papers. We started by asking his opinion on income inequality.
99.9% of us work for a living to cover our expenses, which is really different than an investment class, which can live very handily off of investments. And the unfortunate thing is that when rich people hire lawyers or pay for members of Congress, there's a very skewed, a growing inequity between the haves and the have-nots.
So do you believe that income inequality is an issue and is a bad thing?
Oh, it's a huge issue. A society is only as strong as its weakest member or link. So if we're getting cheap shirts from somewhere, if the people who are doing that are living hand to mouth and are experiencing anxiety and health disparities and violence because of that poverty, and if there are people who are richer than they have more than they need, then they should, just by human ethical reasoning, should have to release those funds and be able to distribute those to those people that are suffering.
Okay. If you listen to what Trump's saying, and a lot of what he's saying to me is, hey guys, we've been the patsy, for the last 40 years. We're giving away the farm when it comes to trade deals because we want third world countries to have a better, life. Meanwhile, the Rust Belt in America, goodness, you've been around Detroit.
Yeah, he makes America out to be quite the martyr.
Well, yeah. Well, and
which I think is a false claim, but
do you believe that there are people who have been hurt in the last 40 years because of the the march of kind of a global economy?
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
But it's been more people in the quote-unquote third world that have suffered under our resource extraction and our support of plutocrats across the world. That's much more of an effect for them. For us, as far as poor American worker, for which there's plenty to be said, it has to do with laissez-faire regulation of corporations. So if corporations can be paid to dismantle factories that used to build cars in Michigan and ship them down to the north border of Mexico and pay those workers a tenth of what were being paid here in the States and work to dismantle the unions, that's a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
So the good jobs aren't coming back unless we start really looking at how a massive unionizing movement or some massive repudiation of these terrible neoliberal these programs that are just crushing the economy.
So the competition by itself is an okay thing in your view?
I think we have to step back from looking at competition. If we just talk about competition and money, then it's game over. The planet's just going to fry. But if we were to step back and look at what corporations do, are they doing good or are they doing ill for the planet and for the living creatures on it? And if they are doing ill, then that needs to be questioned. That needs to be challenged. And it used to be that charters would be dismantled of corporations if they proved to be doing ill instead of good.
It's kind of a sideway into this topic, but that brings up a great point.
Okay.
If you're going to take the power of that equation out of the hand of the guy who built the company and is the billionaire, if you're going to take it out of his hands, it's going to go into somebody else's hands.
Describe that more clearly, because I'm not sure I understand.
Ayn Rand, she said, you know what? In America, it's all based on money. Money is an abstraction, goods and services for money. If you've got money, you've got power.
Yes, you
it's
do.
wonderful.
Right.
In Russia, it's pull. It's who you know.
Oh, understood.
It's the people who can get you the good apartment or the good car.
Right.
Aren't there going to be people who have all the same influence as that billionaire who made the money himself? Isn't there going to be somebody like that who's in some Politburo somewhere, some bureau, some agency, some czar?
Well, this depends on human consciousness. So if we recognize that it is unethical for there to be poverty and wealth, if that gets into the brain and the heart and understand that that is wrong, and that's what it's going to take. It's really going to take people who are suffering to say, no, we don't accept this power differential anymore. So I am not in support of a Soviet-style communism. I am in support of a definitely a more egalitarian society that would have lots of what Marx would have identified as communism, but not what existed and called communism within the Soviet Union.
Okay, great. So I think we've gotten to the nub of our difference of opinion.
Right.
I worry that there will never be a human that will be so virtuous as to be able to do that. That's why I like the abstraction of money.
Oh yeah, that's fine with the abstraction of money. I'm all fine with I'm fine with people being inspired to create a good or service. I think it's great. I have no problem with that. What the problem is, of course, is that the almighty dollar has it's the rat race, and if you buy into that, you are by definition a rat, and you're either stepping on somebody, you're either stepping on your competition, or you're either kissing up or kicking down, and that leads to some really disastrous things in terms of the human heart, the mind, and ultimately our planet when we just start trying to get bigger and bigger and bigger, as opposed to what's the right thing to do for the seventh generation coming.
I think if there were a world where there were resources that were in abundance enough, like you read these stories of when Captain Cook visited Tahiti, and these guys were just living like just the most unbelievable lifestyle you've ever seen in their life. Food was abundant, not a lot of predators. It was just amazing, right? If that were the condition of humanity all over the planet, I would agree with you 100%. And what worries me is that life is, short, brutish.
I don't know if life is short and brutish. I think, I'd say it has become so. A part of it all starts here. So if you are determined to not let the bastards get you down, if they get you to violence or anger, then they've won. So you've got to figure out how to not just get angry about the situation, but look at what is past that.
So do you think there's this renewed interest in nationalism that you'll see as opposed to the pushback to globalism? Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's horrible. It's a veiled dog whistle, I'd say, for racism. Okay,
and fair enough. People who say, I don't think there's any reason that you should try to convince people that they're not hearing those dog whistles. If you think they're there, then you think they're there. When I first heard about globalism, at the end of the Reagan administration, people say, hey, we're going to have a global economy now. I'm like, hold on a second. I know guys from Hong Kong. Why in the world would I want to compete with a guy from Hong Kong?
Right.
I mean, these guys, they have to scrabble for everything.
Well, I can answer that
get.
question so that the 1% get more money. That's why.
Oh, okay, good. So you agree that globalism is...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, it's there to enrich the few and to immiserate the rest of us.
Okay, good. You noticed how after Trump was elected, we see this huge surge of activism, tremendous amount of activism from the left, as though they simply want to say, no, this isn't going to work. They simply want to do things that are either illegal, or they want to shut down protests, or they want to shut down speakers, or they want to, they want to browbeat somehow the president into resigning. I mean, I see this attempt to overturn what was the voice of the people. Can you explain how that's happening on the side who supports progressive causes?
Absolutely. Well, so there, I'll speak to this. I mean, if you look at from his life from the 80s forward, Trump's got a long history of being overtly racist and misogynistic.
Well, I don't want to debate it with you, but I disagree with you.
That's fine. When he was insulting and making fun of disabled people, when he was advocating for, let's say, unkind, if not outright violent responses to people who are not supporting of him, I mean, he really needs loyalty. He really insists on loyalty, and so he'll flip-flop on you. If you turn against Trump, he won't. So when he became president, and he was doing things like trying to ban Muslims from the United States, when he was advocating for harsher treatment of police, when he was doing all this, kick illegal immigrants out of the country, when he was speaking ill of lesbian, bisexual people. These are statements that have damaging effects to our nation. As far as liberals wanting to block people from speaking at universities, for example, I'm of the opinion that it is important to have everybody speak, but I will say that there's a huge disparity between conservative voices like Prager University and Ann Coulter and Fox News compared to the progressive voices which have been systematically crushed ever since Woodrow Wilson's administration because of programs like COINTELPRO and many others.
Okay. I'd like to suggest that you kind of see what you want to see. People see what you want to see.
This is very true.
Now, I watched Trump talking about Serge Kovaleski. I saw him making fun of how he was backpedaling on his story, the man who's disabled.
Right.
Right. What Trump did is what I've seen Robin Williams do, half a dozen times, is imitate a guy who was backpedaling, and he did it poorly.
I don't know what you mean by the backpedaling part.
Backpedaling. Well, Serge Kovaleski changed his story about seeing people dancing on the rooftops, Muslims dancing on the rooftops after 9/11.
Oh, okay.
Serge Kovaleski, Trump said, well, they danced. I saw it in an article. Serge Kovaleski wrote the article. Serge Kovaleski came back and said, no, that's not what I wrote.
Is this
and that's when Trump said, hey, he's backpedaling.
Is this completely different than the journalist who that Trump mocked?
Right, yes. You're doing this because this is the screen print that everyone's seen.
So Are you saying that this story about Muslims dancing on the roof was reported by
Serge Kovaleski,
by this person
yes,
who was
has
like
a disability? But Kovaleski did, he said, well, that article, he kind of backtracked on it. And he backpedaled on it. And
okay, meaning what he had written wasn't accurate? Is that what you're saying?
I forgot the specifics, but,
that's okay.
But Kovaleski said, hey, Trump's wrong. I didn't, that's not really what I said, or something like that.
That it said hundreds and not thousands or something.
Something like that.
Anyway.
He came out and said, Trump's misrepresenting it.
He offended Trump.
Yeah, and then Trump said, hey, why, this dude's backpedaling. He's backpedaling. And then he did this horrific gesture. But haven't you seen Robin Williams do the backpedaling move 100 times?
If you're trying to make it sound like Trump was not mocking a disabled person,
I am making it sound.
I'm disagreeing with you.
So you see,
flat out,
and that's why I think Scott Adams says you see what you want to see. Now, I saw President Obama on a talk show say, "Hey, whenever I'm bowling, hey, it's like the Special Olympics," and my jaw dropped. Here's the President of the United States comparing his poor bowling scores to disabled children. Now, where is the outrage?
I don't know.
Yeah. Had you ever heard that? I'm just curious. In your circles, had you ever heard that President Obama said that?
Well, there's plenty worse that's said about Obama, like not being a U.S. citizen, being a communist, being whatever.
If you're talking about who's got more bad things said about him, Trump versus Obama, I don't think there's a contest.
No, but anyway. My point is this: that we keep pointing fingers at each other and trying to build an argument,
but let's not
rather than looking at the actual effects of their policy.
But
that's
my point is, we see what we want to see.
Of course we do.
I saw in Obama, this reinforced everything I didn't like about Obama. It reinforced every single thing. It's an effort for me not to hate the man. Just because, I hate the fact that he uses a black accent when he's in front of a black crowd.
There's plenty
I just hate that. That seems so phony.
Well,
but I have to try to. I have to try to. You know, he's our president. I will get along with him. He's my president.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to try to bring him down. Now, I would just like some of that same coming from progressives. That same level of tolerance.
Why should we tolerate Trump's incredible intolerance?
Well, you see it as intolerance. I don't see any intolerance.
That's fine.
Is it possible that when you see this harsh reaction to Trump, it may be that you're seeing things that you want to see instead of what the rest of us see?
Well, I know what I want to see is I want to see tolerance and understanding between different groups of people. There's a lot to feel a strong amount of repudiation against.
Okay. So when you ponder, I guess just think about the people who did vote for Trump, where do you think they're coming from?
Well, I think they're coming from a lot of economic anxiety, number one, as well as for folks that don't feel comfortable, either a little bit or a lot of it, about people of different cultures or races, then having had Obama in office, for all the things that I did not like about Obama, he was a black man. And I think that really inspired a lot of gun buying and a lot of, it unearthed a lot of latent racism. So I think I think that's part of the reason that Trump got elected as well.
Okay. Do you think it's a valid fear to fear that illegal immigrants are decreasing wages for people, like, for example, in construction or in, hotel management, that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah. It's definitely a valid fear.
So then do you believe that illegal immigration is something that we should stop? And if one of the solutions is to build a wall, then sure, build a wall.
Well, I think a wall is impossible. I mean, it's going to cost so much money.
We won't argue the specifics.
And there's lots of ways around it. And when people are illegal immigrants, which moved up because of either economic reasons or because they were escaping being shot at by a gang, again, on the Statue of Liberty, it says, "Give me your tired, you're poor." Sure. So our approach is, are we going to kick down on another human being who's just trying to make a living and live? Or are we going to take a more healing approach and look at how every human being who happens to be in the United States, what can we do to help them be a appreciated and welcomed and compensated member of society?
Okay, but you would agree, the thought experiment of saying, okay, I've got a life raft and hold 10 and there's 40 people. And if more than 10 get on, it'll swamp and everybody will die. At some point, if there are resources that are limited,
but you're coming at it from a scarcity thing. The scarcity is only because there's a lot of money and a consciousness unwillingness to look at how to change. So you're saying reality does exist, that we can be swamped, but you're saying we're nowhere near being swamped yet. So the illegal immigrants who have come in so far are not. Well, it depends where you're looking. So if you look at the United States, we're not in any way swamped compared to, say, Africa.
What about folks in the construction industry? You can hire people to hang drywall for like $5 an hour.
Yeah.
And that's depressed the wages tremendously in construction.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So wouldn't you say, at least in some corners of the economy, there are bad things that are happening because of these
unless there are regulations and laws in place and enforced, that's exactly what's going to happen. And I think that's wrong.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So if there's a construction guy who's trying to make more money by paying his or her workers less, that's unethical, and that person should have their license revoked. If you're going to try and maximize profits and minimize costs, and your focus is on goods and services, not on the mental and physical health of the life on the planet, human beings and everybody else, that's the problem.
Okay, so what mechanism would allow people to do that? Do we just have to say, okay, everybody, let's be nicer now? I mean, how do you, with capitalism, you can say, here's this medium called money, we'll trade you money for service. That's the deal. It's pretty straightforward. How do you enforce something like that, where you're saying, well, now you have to keep these other things in mind?
It's not really an enforcement thing. It's more of a conversation that builds into being a cultural norm.
Okay, I
So it
understand.
starts-
And you see in the Scandinavian countries this amazing kind of
Right.
economy that seems
Right.
to do that, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And a lot has to do with what you imagine. So if you can imagine what you want, then work towards it.
Okay.
That's what I say.
And that I can admire that.
Yeah.
And especially because sometimes it works. You know, sometimes you're absolutely right.
You know,
That
it
will
doesn't
change the
even
world.
matter whether it works or not. The important thing is
Good
that
point.
that's your philosophy and you just do it.
Okay.
Because it's the right thing to do for your fellow man and woman and your planet.
Okay, I only have one last question. Thank you so much for your
Oh, yeah.
time.
Yep.
So,
Bring 'em on.
one of the fundamentals I think the conservatives think is that we're afraid of big programs, grandiose programs, because we've seen some of the debacles of the past.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that comes to mind is the great urban renewal of the 40s through the 70s,
Mm-hmm.
where all the best minds in the country, all the best architects, the social scientists, the social workers themselves, and the politicians, they all thought the solution to urban renewal was to build these giant high-rise apartments in the cities where we would put all the people that needed housing. And what an astounding catastrophe that has been. I mean, there's no one who will defend them now.
But why do you think that was a disaster?
The point I was trying to make is everybody was in agreement. I mean, the science was settled on, on how to do good urban renewal.
And it's very racially biased science.
I suppose so.
And class biased science.
They had some myopia that they didn't realize at the time.
They see what they want to see.
Okay, back in the 70s again, this wonderful food pyramid that kept us all starving because it told us to eat carbs instead of fats and and proteins. I mean, there's one after another. You can name these
Right.
debacles
Sure.
where all of the best and brightest in our society thought it would work this way. It sounded good, and then they just made that the law of the land practically, and then it failed miserably.
Right.
So doesn't that give you pause when you think about things like the living wage or reducing the estate tax or increasing unemployment insurance?
Why would it cost me down?
healthcare?
I don't understand.
All of these things are these kind of big government programs that progressives are fighting for right now. Living wage type
Again,
thing.
I think
Don't you think there could be equal or if not worse debacles in the future, unintended consequences, as you pointed out, because of these kinds of massive, government tends to...
I think I understand your question.
Good.
So I think it has less to do with the massive or the smallness of our government. It's more, how are those initiatives being designed and how are they enacted? So if you get enough involvement, if you get true representative government going, if you were to ask, the millions of Americans what they think would work as far as solving our problems, we could come up with it. But because our economy is capitalistic and kowtows to the biggest rat in the room, that's going to be an impossibility. I would be actually in favor of a large government, but it has to be large in that it includes you and me, that there are mechanisms in place, and they did this in Cuba, and there's plenty of problems with Cuba, but one of the lovely things about Cuba, they have people who are representative at the local level, and there are conversations about, hey, how's your life going, and how can we make your life, feel less stressful, and where you're going to feel more like a contributing member of society. So we have to get away from this individualism and this capitalism, in my opinion. Let's say that I was the only person around, and I saw you fall and break a leg. I would just help you. I wouldn't ask myself what your religion is. I wouldn't care who you voted for. I would just help you. We need to bring that impulse into how we look not only at each other as individuals, but also looking at the disappearance of species. The kind of economy we've got is destroying the planet. So if our children want to have any kind of life at all on this planet, we've got to radically re-examine what we do in our lives and what we're consuming and how much we're consuming and what we're doing with the hours that we've got. And it has to be about communication and heart connecting. And it has to do with not participating in an economy that's killing our planet.
That's a great way to explain your opinion. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You bet.
That was Brian Lacy in Portland, Oregon, the owner of Urban Bees and Gardens, where the focus is to renew the bond between plants, pollinators, and people. Talking with Brian makes me think there has to be some value in hearing people with widely differing opinions talk passionately about their hopes for the world. I hope you agree and may want to support the series by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks.